Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with part 1 of my October wrap-up. The first book I finished in October was Dark and Deepest Red by Anna Marie McLemore. This is a magical realism novel that takes place in 2 timelines. In the modern timeline, we are following a girl named Rosella, and her family are shoemakers, and there's something a little bit magic about these shoes, and she lives in a town where there's something a little bit magic about the town as well, because every year there's this kind of magical event at the lake, I think it is, where they live, and the town is mostly pretty normal except for this magical thing that happens once a year that everyone just kind of accepts, and it's always a different kind of magic, it's always a different effect, and so Rosella is one of our main characters, and we are also following Emil, who is a Romani boy, and both of them are kind of familiar with what it's like to feel like outsiders, because even though the attitudes are not as bad as in the past timeline, which I'll get to, they still are othered by some of the townspeople. There's still a tendency when things go wrong to look to the families who have brown skin. So even though prejudice is not as strong a part of their story as the past timeline, the book definitely still deals with that in the modern day. And one day Rosella can't get these shoes off of her feet, and Emil's family has a history of knowing about this curse, and so he seems like he can be the only one who might be able to help her. This is a retelling of the Red Shoes, and it also deals with the dancing plague in, I think, Strasbourg? Yes. In Strasbourg, France, which happened in 1518 and was a real historical event. That's what the past timeline deals with, and we follow a character named Lavinia, and she and her family are blamed for this dancing plague, and we see how these two stories kind of parallel each other in some ways, and I loved this book. I have loved all of Anna Marie McLemore's books, so that was no surprise, and I don't generally like dual timeline stories, but I really liked this one. As always, McLemore's writing is absolutely stunning and gorgeous without, to me, feeling like the descriptions like overtake the story or the characters or anything. The setting was described beautifully. I really loved our main characters. We also follow Oliver and the prejudice that he deals with in the past as well. He is a trans character, and there's a lot about homophobia and transphobia and prejudice, especially against the Romani people and against Latinx people. There's also an element of this book that shows the parts of themselves that people hide for safety, and I don't feel like the book ever judges people for those decisions. Like, of course, we want people to feel safe enough to be their true selves, but the things that people have to do to survive, I don't feel like the story ever criticizes people who make those decisions, which I thought was really lovely. The elements of family and culture are beautifully done. I also thought the retelling elements were done really well. The atmosphere of this book was really good. Like, the dancing plague was creepy to read about. I also really liked the romances in this book, and I pretty much loved everything about it. I apparently gave this book 4.5 stars. I feel like it was in kind of the middle of my Anna Marie McLemore books that I have read, but I can't remember why I took points off, honestly, so I really enjoyed this one. Next, I finished The Princess Who Didn't Eat Cake by S.L. Cooper, and I think the subtitle on this one is A Demisexual Fairy Tale, which is essentially what this is. It's a fairy tale used to kind of explore and define a little bit what demisexuality is. And it's a very short fairy tale about a princess who, as you can guess from the title, doesn't like cake, and cake is used as a stand-in for sexual interest or activity. So it covers how she feels when she's the only one who, it seems like she's the only one who doesn't want to eat cake, and then the difficulty in explaining herself when she finds one kind of cake that she does like, but she doesn't have any interest in other kinds. So yeah, just like a really thoughtful, interesting story. It's obviously very short, so I don't want to give too much of it away, but definitely I think worth the read. And this ebook is actually a combination of things. So we have the fairy tale, and we also have an essay about demisexuality and the author's experience. We also have recommendations of books that have demisexual or asexual or aspec characters in general. And then we also have a note on kind of content warnings and trigger warnings and why those are important, which I thought was really cool. And the author actually, the reason that she uses the word content warnings is actually similar to what I do, which is basically that being triggered by something is a very specific thing, and I don't want to like try and make a value judgment about that. And I also just feel like trigger warnings, I think, can sometimes make people feel like if they don't have a specific experience with a thing, then a trigger shouldn't affect them. Whereas with content warnings, it's like you might not have a particular experience or trauma that would be literally triggered by reading something, but that doesn't mean that you're in the headspace to want to read about it. So I really liked the writing of this. I think this is a really excellent resource. I thought the fairy tale was a really fun way to like explore or explain the concept of demisexuality, and I gave this 5 stars because I honestly can't think of any aspect of it that I think should have been done like more effectively or something. I thought the fairy tale was fun, the essay and the recommendations list were really important and informative, and just like as a whole package, I think this ebook did a lot of really important things really effectively and in a fun, interesting, and engaging way. Next, I finished A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow. This is a contemporary, I guess contemporary fantasy or contemporary, I guess paranormal a little bit. So in this world there are several kinds of magical beings, and one of those is sirens, and the only people who are sirens are Black women. Not every Black woman is a siren, but every siren is a Black woman. And so this book deals with the implications of that, and how that kind of folds into and affects the racism in the United States. We follow 2 main characters, Tavia and Effie, and Tavia is a siren and she's hiding this. It's very dangerous once people know that you're a siren, and Effie is her, I think, adoptive sister. And the premise for the book is about how there's a YouTube star who basically comes out as a siren, who acknowledges that she is a siren, and how that affects how Tavia feels about her powers and if she wants to continue hiding them. And there's also some ongoing protests regarding police brutality and violence against Black women, and the way that being suspected of being a siren is a way to absolve people who hurt or kill Black women of any guilt. And I really, really liked this. I know this has gotten somewhat mixed reviews, but I thought this was really thoughtful and just a really brilliant exploration of race in a very different way. I loved the sister relationship between Effie and Tavia. I actually really enjoyed both of their characters, and I just loved their sisterly bond. It was really lovely. I thought the themes of this book were handled so skillfully. I think sometimes when magical elements are used in a contemporary setting to point out societal evils, I think sometimes there's a risk of the magic sort of like overshadowing or like diluting the real issues, and I definitely don't think that happened here. I think the way that this book specifically addresses the way that we forget Black women, the way that we hurt and kill Black women, and the excuses people use for doing that, I think that was really, really powerful. And I think especially like the way that sirens, their power is in their voice, and what people in this book are afraid of are Black women speaking, and I think that's a really powerful element to use in this story. There are also other magical beings in this, like Ilocos, and those were really, really interesting as well. I believe the companion sequel is going to focus more on them, which I'm really looking forward to. And the way that these issues play into the Black Lives Matter protests and movement, I think that was done really well. There's also a little bit of a romance element in this book that was definitely very subtle, but I thought it was really sweet. I actually liked that a lot. I think one of the reasons that this book maybe does get kind of mixed reviews is it's a little hard to pin down the central story. Like, it was one of those books where as I went through the book, I couldn't really figure out basically like what the summary would be of this book. And I don't think that's because it's poorly plotted. I think it's because this is really like an exploratory type book. Like, it's almost slice of life in some places, but slice of a very different kind of life, in the sense of there are magical beings in this world. So I can see why that might not work for everybody, but I really, really liked it. I actually kind of liked the feeling of not knowing where things were going to go. I think that kept me really engaged. There were a couple of things I didn't love about the way this book was written though. One of them is there was an element of the writing itself that I think was very confusing as far as the exposition went. Like, you know how a lot of times authors, if they're doing exposition well and kind of like sneakily, you know how they'll kind of refer to things in a way where like the characters already know it, but the way it's done, the reader is like, oh, okay, this is a new thing. I understand this thing now. In A Song Below Water, I kind of felt like the way those bits of world building or other backstory, the way those were incorporated into the book kind of felt like they were things that we were already supposed to know. Which I found really confusing. I kept flipping back through the book multiple times to try and figure out like, wait, did we know about this? And the way that certain things were explained, I think they were explained a little too late in the book, and I also think that they were explained in a way that was kind of confusing. And then my only other complaint is I really like how Effie, she has this job as like a mermaid in like a water park. She's not actually a mermaid or a siren. She dresses up as one and she like performs as one, and she's really good at it. And I really, really liked that element, and I wish that we had had more of that. But other than that, I really, really liked this book, and I gave A Song Below Water 4 stars. Next, I finished Patina by Jason Reynolds. This is the second companion book in the Track series, which is a middle grade contemporary series following a bunch of kids on a track team. And our main character of this one is, of course, Patina, who we did meet in the first book, but this is like her novel. once again, I really loved this. I really love the way that Jason Reynolds writes. He's so good at using small details to really build characters and build a story. Like, some of the descriptions he uses are just so funny and so perfect. Like, there was one in this book about Patina is thinking about like how clean the car smells, but it's like the poisonous kind of clean, she says, you know, like when you clean a bathtub, which I thought was so funny and so perfect because like I knew immediately what she meant. I loved these characters as always. I really admire Patina, and I think the dedication of this book is a really good encapsulation. It's for those who've been passed the baton too young. And also in the acknowledgements, when Jason Reynolds ends his acknowledgements with, and most importantly, to all the young ladies who feel forced to carry the load, this one's for you. And we really see that come through in Patina's character and the way that she's kind of been forced to become a caregiver much earlier than she should have had to. Like, she's a kid and she's worrying about her younger sister and taking care of people and everything, and she shouldn't have to worry about those things. And the family relationships in this book are really wonderful and complex. This was definitely a very emotional book in places, and we see also what running means to Patina, and she's the one who, like I mentioned this in an earlier video, she's the one who, like, when people are talking about running, she's like, it's not that deep, I just like running, which is true. But I think also as you go through the book, you realize, and Patina starts to realize, that there is a more personal dimension to it, which I thought was done really beautifully. And like, seeing what running means to Patina and to her family is just like really emotional and powerful. And like, by the second half of this book, I was tearing up every time Patina would say something like, I am my mother's legs, because of what that means in the context of the story. So yeah, continue to really love this series. I gave Patina 4.5 stars. This was also the month I realized I was completely out of renewals for my library books, so you're gonna see a few of those in this month as well. And the first of those is In the Shadow of the Sun by E.M. Castellan. This is a historical fantasy inspired by the reign of the Sun King, who I believe I misidentified in my last TBR video. Thank you, Margaret, for reminding me of that. I believe I said it was Louis the 16th, and it's actually King Louis the 14th. So this book is set in that era, and in this version of fantasy France, there is a kind of magic, and it involves two kinds of people or practitioners. The people who are the magicians, or magician, I think. They are the ones who can actually like use the magic and kind of direct it to accomplish things, but they can't do this unless they have a source. Those are the people who have the power. And it's in a way, very balanced magic system, because the sources can't use their magic without somebody to direct it, who are the magicians, and the magicians can't use it without a source of power, who are the sources. So it's very reciprocal in that way, although sources are much rarer. And we follow our main character Henriette, who has been, I think she was a member of the English royal family, and they had been deposed, but they just got their throne back, so now she's like suddenly a marketable possible spouse again. And so she is arranged to marry, I think, one of the princes of France. So at the beginning of the book, that's what happens. And so Henriette is trying to navigate this very different world of court politics and intrigue and everything. And then also sources are being murdered. So in France, a lot of these sources are turning up dead. They've been murdered and their power has been taken from them. So Henriette she hasn't revealed to anybody that she's a source. She doesn't want people to know that. So she's trying to figure out what is happening to these people and how she can protect herself. And I was pretty disappointed in this one, actually. I did like the world building and the setting. It's like this very lush fantasy version of France, which was very interesting to read about. I liked that. I also thought the writing was pretty good. And I also found the character of King Louis himself to be really interesting. I actually think he was one of the more dynamic and interesting characters in the book. Even though like you didn't always like him, I think, like I said, he was just an interesting character, and I was always really curious to see what he would do. On the negative side though, I was just really bored with this book. I don't feel like a lot happened. Actually, like my favorite scenes were generally things that did not have to do with the main plot, like especially interactions with the king, or like when you're kind of exploring like the way magic is used in this world. I thought that was really fun and interesting. There were a couple of scenes with magic actually being used for a like demonstration or like a pageant type thing that I liked. And I also feel like the side characters were pretty disappointing. I'm somebody who looks forward to loving side characters, and I didn't really have a lot to hold on to here. Especially there were some where I feel like the author clearly wanted us to really like them, and it just like wasn't working for me. Like, so Henriette's husband is already involved with somebody else, with this man, I don't remember his name, but he's clearly supposed to be like really charming, and I think we're supposed to like him in spite of ourselves. He was just super obnoxious, and I did not care about him. I also had some issues with Henriette's husband, because like even though we're told that they eventually like work things out between them, I'm not sure I really bought it, and I just didn't find him as interesting of a character. Honestly, there was better romantic tension between Henriette and the king than between her and who we were actually, I think, supposed to want her to end up with, which I think is a problem, which, like, thematically, I can see why the author did the things that she did with the king's character and with the way that him and Henriette interact. I actually can see that and appreciate that. But on a storytelling level, it's like, why would you put all of your most interesting romantic scenes between the characters who we are not supposed to want to see together, you know? So that was kind of weird. I was also pretty frustrated by some elements of the plot. So yeah, altogether, pretty disappointed in this one. There are things I liked and things I didn't, but overall, I'm just kind of like, whatever. I don't plan to continue the series, and I gave In the Shadow of the Sun 3 stars. Next, I finished I Love You So Mochi by Sarah Kuhn, and this is a contemporary novel, and we follow our main character, Kimi, who's Japanese American, and there's a chunk at the beginning of the book where she is at home in the US. We see her and her friends hanging out. We also see Kimi's relationship with her mother. Kimi's mother is a painter, I think, and she just kind of assumes that that's still what Kimi wants to do with her life, and Kimi's not sure that she really wants to do that anymore. She really loves fashion and creating clothing and designing clothing, and like that's a hobby of hers, a passion of hers, but she doesn't really feel that passion for painting anymore. But she's afraid to tell her mother this because this is something that they bonded over. It's something that her mother is so dedicated to seeing Kimi get her chance to achieve. And they end up getting into a really big fight about this, so that when Kimi gets a letter from her grandparents in Japan asking her to come visit them for spring break, she jumps at the chance and she goes to meet her grandparents in Japan for the first time. And that's where the rest of the book, like the majority of the book, takes place. And I really, really liked this book. I thought it was just going to be like a cute, fluffy, sweet story, and some of it was, but there was also a lot of really wonderful depth here. I also loved the setting of Kyoto, Japan. There's a romance element that I really, really liked. She meets this boy Akira and they spend a lot of time together, and it was just really sweet and really cute. And like I said, I love the way that Kimi's passion for clothing and sewing and fashion was treated like the important thing it is. That it's not just something meaningless that she does on the side, that clothing and design can be an important way for people to express themselves. It can bring joy to people. It's just as important as other industries. I think this book points out something really accurate, that there is a tendency to treat things like that as frivolous, and I don't think they are. And Kimi ends up writing almost email letter type things to her mother, explaining different outfits and why she connects emotions to these outfits and the power that clothing has to hold our memories. And I just thought that was so beautiful. I also loved the development of Kimi's relationship with her grandparents. That was just really, really lovely to watch. I think overall this book had a beautiful balance of sweet and serious, which is something I really enjoy in contemporaries. And yeah, I just really, really liked this. I ended up buying a copy, which I don't have yet, but I'm excited for that. And I gave I Love You So Mochi 4 stars. Next, I finished Fangs by Sarah Anderson. This is a graphic novel, or like I guess like a series of comics about a vampire girl and a werewolf boy, and they're dating. I was really, really disappointed in this, unfortunately. I did like the art style. It's by the author of Sarah Scribbles, and I did like the art. Unfortunately, where this book really failed for me was the humor. Sometimes it landed for me, and sometimes, a lot of times, it really, really didn't. I think dark humor is a really difficult thing to do anyway, and I don't think this did it very well. I know everyone makes fun about like the trend of like vegetarian vampires and everything, which like, I get that, and I wasn't expecting that from this graphic novel, but I do think it's weird that this is set up as like a cute romance, and then you go into it, and one of the main characters is literally a serial killer. Like the vampire girl, who I don't remember her name, she like enjoys the fact that she kills people, and it's not even one of those things where like she kills people she thinks deserves it or whatever. And again, that's not what I expect from every vampire story, to be that take on it, but for like a cutesy romance one, I did kind of expect something other than, wow, I don't like you at all and I don't care what happens to you. So yeah, this is a case of like, it's really not for me. I know other people have enjoyed this. Probably a lot of people would enjoy this or will, but it really was just not my thing, and I gave Fangs 2.75 stars. Next, I finished The Epic Crush of Genie Lo by F.C. Yi. This is the first book in the series, and we follow our main character Genie, who is Chinese American, and right at the beginning of the book, she meets this strange boy at her school named Quentin, who is really, really attractive, but very, very strange. And he tells her that she is meant to help him save the world, that he's actually from Chinese folklore and stories and mythology, and that she is as well, and that she has to help him save the world from these Chinese folklore monsters. I really liked the way that Chinese folklore and mythology was used in this book, not just the way that it was incorporated into the story, but the actual way that those stories were retold. There were a couple of places that the way they were written was just really, really funny, so I really liked that. I thought Genie was an interesting main character. I really liked some of the side characters as well. Like, I really liked Genie and her best friend, their relationship. I didn't love some other aspects of the book. Like, the writing was not really my favorite. It kind of felt like, I don't know, it was trying a little too hard to be how a teenager would talk. It wasn't like the worst I've ever read, but in that respect by any means. It was just something that I noticed and it wasn't quite my thing. I also feel like the plot of the book was a little bit haphazard, and I think some of that makes sense because part of the plot is Quentin and Genie going to different places and tracking down different monsters and things, but I just think the story could have felt a little bit more cohesive. And then another big issue I had was I was not a big fan of Quentin. And he's like a pretty significant character, and especially because him and Genie have this kind of like semi-flirtation, like potential romance. And it wasn't until the very end of the book that I was like finally on board for that, which I feel like is not a great sign. So yeah, Quentin he kind of irritated me sometimes. But like I said, I did like some of the other characters. I liked some of the characters that we meet from Chinese folklore, mythology, or stories in general. I do wonder how people who worship or honor Kuan Yin would feel about the way she was portrayed here. There's a couple things in particular near the end where I'm like, oh, I don't know how people would feel about that. But as a character, I did really like her. So I gave The Epic Crush of Genie Lo 3.5 stars. I did like it. I don't know that I liked it enough to want to continue the series. Next, I finished PSB 11 by Rita Williams Garcia. This is the second book in the Gaither Sisters trilogy. I think that's what it's called. So Delphine is our main character and our narrator, and after she and her sisters Vonetta and Fern visited their mother in Oakland over the summer, they come back and they have a little bit of trouble adjusting after spending so much time around people who were talking about Black power and the power of their voices and things like that. To go back to their family and school and everything, it feels a little different. And so our main character, Delphine, she ends up writing letters to her mother, and we see those letters exchanged throughout the book, and her mother is giving her advice too on parts of her life. We also see Delphine at school and the way she interacts with a new teacher she has. And of course there's a lot about family relationships, not only the sisters, but also with their mother and their father and grandmother who they live with, and their uncle as well. And this book also touches on some really important issues of the time, like the Vietnam War, and some other things that would maybe be spoilers, but those will be in the content warnings in the description box. And I really, really enjoyed this installment in the series. I continue to really enjoy the writing and Delphine's really strong voice. The really complex family relationships in this series I think are continued to be done really well. I really like the elements of the letters between Delphine and her mother, and the way that you can see they're both still kind of figuring out what their relationship is. I also really liked the interactions between Delphine and some of her friends, or possibly frenemies at school. I think those were really interesting. I continue to be really, really invested in this group of characters. Like I said, I liked the school elements. I wasn't sure how I felt about that part of the plot at first because it was such a change from the focus of the last book, but I ended up really enjoying that. I also think this book does a great job of showing accurate attitudes of the time for a lot of people while still indicating that those are not the right way to think. Like when some of the characters are very dismissive of the idea of a woman being capable of being president, even though Delphine is initially like, yeah, that doesn't make sense, a woman couldn't be president, you see her kind of start to change her mind, and you see how other characters feel about that as well. And I think it's clear from the way the book is written that the people who think that's impossible are wrong. So I think Rita Williams Garcia did a great job of showing like true to the period attitudes, while also making it clear to the reader that like that's not right, which I thought was really cool. Also, it's kind of funny because in the first book I mentioned how I had really complex feelings about their mother, and sometimes I understood where she was coming from, and sometimes she did things that were like really upsetting or maybe like really angry. In this book, it was their father that I was really upset with. There's a few things he does in particular that I hated, that just made me really angry, and I think were like a perfect example of him doing something for a reason that he thinks is right, and that it's like preparing the children for like the real world or whatever. Some of the choices he made were just very frustrating, and a couple of them you could kind of see why he thought he was being a responsible parent by making these choices, but just very, very frustrating. But overall I really, really liked this book. The only thing that I didn't love is I feel like the ending was a little bit rushed. Even though I really liked a lot of things about the ending, I think that there could have been more time spent on it. But I really, really liked this, and I gave PSB 11 4.5 stars. Next, I finished Signal to Noise by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and this was a buddy read with my friend Yvette from Book Cave, linked down below as always. And this is another dual timeline novel. Interesting. This one is set in Mexico City in, I think, the 80s. Yeah, 1988. And then the other time period is in, let's see, 2009. And our main character is a young woman named Meche. Well, she's a young woman in the modern timeline. In the past, she's a young teenager. And this is a kind of like urban contemporary fantasy, I guess, or there's a little bit of fantasy in it, because Meche and her two friends, Sebastian and Daniela, they discover that they can use certain records. There's magic in them, and they can use them for spells and to make things happen. And in the present day timeline, there has been a falling out between these friends. Meche is coming back to Mexico City for the funeral of her father and to kind of go through his things. And then in the past timeline, we're seeing Meche and Daniela and Sebastian figure out that they have this power, and we see them start to use this power, and we're kind of leading up to the friendship breakup that happened, that we're still seeing effects from in the 2009 timeline. This was a really interesting book. I think Silvia Moreno Garcia is so good at getting you invested in characters who you don't necessarily like, or like you like them but you acknowledge that they're also unlikable. Like Meche especially, like she's very messy, and some of the choices she makes are a little frustrating to watch because you can tell they're gonna go badly, but like I understood why she was doing them, and I still felt for her, and I still wanted things to turn out well for her. I also really, really liked Daniela and Sebastian and the complicated friendship that the three of them had. I also don't normally like books where there's like this big friendship breakup or whatever, and you don't know why until like the very end of the book. I normally find that frustrating, but I think the way it was done here was really, really good. I also loved Meche's grandmother. She was one of the only adults in these kids' lives who like actually loved them and tried to take care of them. So that made this book kind of hard to read at parts, because you just wanted somebody to like love and take care of these kids the way that they needed. I also always liked the way that Moreno Garcia writes, and I also felt myself pretty consistently engaged with both timelines. Near the beginning of the book, the modern timeline was hiding my attention more because I think the like building drama and anticipation of seeing these characters meet after so many years and seeing maybe clues as to what happened in the past, like I think that was really, really engaging. And again, like I said, the past timeline, the beginning of it especially, it was kind of hard to read because these kids were just like not being taken care of. But as the book went on, I found both of them to be pretty equally interesting as we started getting more scenes with the friends, and we saw them spending time together and using this music magic and everything, and starting to unravel some of the mysteries of like what went wrong with their friendship. I also thought that the way things ended was really well done and really satisfying. I do think parts of this book would be more effective or more engaging if you have a specific like emotional connection or interest in like the era of music or like the songs especially that they use in particular. I don't have that like emotional connection to these bands or to this music or anything, so that wasn't an element that necessarily had a like super strong effect on me, but the concept was still really cool. And even without that emotional connection to the music, I really, really liked this, and I gave Signal to Noise 4 stars. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today for the first half of my October wrap-up is What Kitty Did Next by Carrie Cablian. This is a historical fiction kind of retelling. Well, not really a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, it's a continuation of the story, set after the events of the novel, and we're following Kitty as the main character, Kitty Bennett. This is the only retelling I've heard about that follows Kitty, and I was really excited about this because she's definitely like one of the sisters who doesn't get as much attention like in the book, but also I think in the fandom, and I'm happy to say that I really, really liked this. So after the events of Pride and Prejudice, Kitty is kind of feeling like she doesn't really know what she's gonna do with her life, and not that she has many options as like a well-born but not super wealthy lady. Lydia is no longer living at home, and Lydia was always a sister that Kitty was close to, so she kind of doesn't know what to do. But then she gets the opportunity to stay in London for a while with her aunt and uncle, and she ends up visiting some of her sisters elsewhere in England, and we really see Kitty start to like come to her own a little bit, start to meet more people, start to become closer to some of her other sisters. I'm being very vague in case you haven't read Pride and Prejudice. And Kitty also develops a really strong friendship with Georgiana Darcy, which I really loved. I really liked the way that Kitty and Georgiana were characterized in this book, and also their friendship together. I really enjoyed that. And I just think the characterization in general was really, really well done. I think the characters that are very prominent in the original novel, like Elizabeth and some of the other Bennets, they were done in a way that felt very true to them, while also putting them in situations where we could see them in a different light. Like this book actually made me like Mr. Bennet a little bit more, which I never thought I would say. He is not one of my favorite characters. And Mrs. Bennet too, like we got to see a little bit more depth with her, and I really liked that. I thought the writing was well done. I also really enjoyed getting to see Kitty as the main character of a novel. That was really fun. I also really liked the romance. I thought that was really sweet, and I really enjoyed seeing Kitty's relationships develop more with the characters we know from the original novel. The biggest issue I had with this book was the chunk in the middle. For one thing, the conflict that happens is really frustrating, although I think that part of that makes sense, because I think part of the point of that incident is to show that women in society, like if something happens where you're blamed for something, there's not a lot you can do about it. You don't always get the chance to explain yourself. People kind of get to make up their own minds about what they think happened or who you are. So even though that was annoying, I think it was period appropriate, and I think that thematically that was a really interesting thing to explore. But as the back of the book says, but Kitty is resilient. She has learned from her experiences, and what she does next will surprise everyone, including herself. So we see that even though this terrible thing happened, Kitty has kind of developed ways to cope with that. Like she's a stronger and more confident person. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I think if you are a fan of Jane Austen retellings, or even just curious about them, and especially if you want one that's a little different from the like Elizabeth and Darcy meet in different circumstances kind of thing, which not that there's anything wrong with those, I really enjoy some of those, but if you're looking for something a little different, I think this might be a good bet, and I gave What Kitty Did Next 4 stars. Okay everybody, so those are all of the books I read in the first part of October. This is part 1 of my wrap up. Please let me know down below if you guys have read and enjoyed any of these books, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!